Hello, my name is Cloud Cardona, and I'm here with Emma Trelles in McKenna Hall. The date is October 16th, and we are here at the University of Notre Dame. This is our second interview for the Oral History Project, and I'm excited to dig into your new collection and talk about your literary activism and community work.
Thanks for having me, Cloud.
Yeah, of course.
And nice to meet you.
Yes, nice to meet you too.
Yeah.
So I want to start with your newest collection and kind of backtrack from there. So your newest collection, The Courage and the Clock, could you talk about what the process was like for you writing this collection and kind of the build up to its release?
Sure. Courage and the Clock, I wrote the title poem of the collection. It was the first poem I wrote after Tropicalia was published. So I've been working on that book for a very long time because, as you know, Tropicalia was published, 13 years ago, which was, in itself a transformative experience for me as a poet and just as a human, because of just the community and the communities that I was able to meet and be a part of and learn from and lift. So, and of course, as an artist, having your book published is just, kind of an amazing experience. It's kind of difficult to describe. It's not anything that I had imagined for myself. So I wrote that title poem called Courage and the Clock, and since then I was writing for years and publishing pretty widely for years as well, but I kind of likened myself to a little sparrow because I was just kind of building it one tiny twig at a time. And I think also because I'm older now and I'm not thinking so much about book. I mean, I won't lie, I'm definitely, there is the undercurrent of that. But superseding that is this idea of trying to be authentic, write the best and most honest poems to my ability in that moment, in that moment of completion. And that's really was the driving force. Although, it's misleading to say that I did not agonize at times about, oh my gosh, why is this taking me so long? But, I do a lot of work, literary activism, as you mentioned, and I also, I work full time, and the people in my life take precedence over my writing practice. People first, always. And I think a lot of people can even do those things and still, write and complete books, but I'm just not one of them. So I just have to kind of learn to do things at my own pace, no matter how bitter that herb tastes at times. But yeah, that was just kind of the inner journey, I would say, of that collection. Yeah.
I like that people first over poems, because I think so often, in your poetry, the people play into the poems and it's part of what you're writing about. And kind of speaking to that authenticity, like how do you feel like you access that authentic self or write into that authenticity in your poetry?
I think that it's only something that's become visible, that I've become really conscious of over the last 5 years or so. To the point that I'd go back and sort of revise poems that I had already written, that were published, that were finished, and I was like, no, that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm skimming this, estoy por arribita on that, and I'm just trying to dig a little deeper. That's become the most important part of my writing practice, I would say. That's currently what I'm focused on. That could change. But I feel like that idea of honesty is really like sunk into my bones now as a poet in a way that maybe it had not existed before. Not that I was walking around pretending or lying or anything, but it's really at the forefront of my mind when I'm writing. And I think that also, that doesn't mean I feel like I have to be 100% confessional about my life, because I'm a very private person, and I'm very careful what I share, but I'm still trying to go there and share it in my own way.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
So kind of looking at your last collection, Tropicalia, and this new collection, it seems like music is a constant theme, right? And I think in your last interview, you kind of talked about being a musician and having a relationship to music, and that seems apparent in your poetry through references to Stevie Nicks, to Jane's Addiction, Billy Bragg. So how do you feel like your relationship to music has changed through your poetry since Tropicalia? Is it still like a major part of your writing? Do you feel like it shifted in any way? Or if you could kind of just speak to the importance of like musical references in your poetry.
Yeah. Well, music was a really big part of my life as a child. I mean, I would, and I'm a lot older, so I had like a little tape recorder that I would literally just like tape songs and hold them up to the radio so I could hear them later. And I always loved to sing, and I think it's very generous of you to call me a musician. I would say I was more of a dilettante, but I did write, songs for our little band, and I did sing, and I loved that. I played a very bad bass guitar. I just didn't want to stand up there without anything in front of me, between me and the audience. So I think that's why I said, okay, I'll play the bass. I don't know what I'm doing, but that's all right. And then I married a musician. And so, we have instruments all over our house, 6 or 7 guitars. Mark bought a theremin last year. Wow. Clairvox, she stands in the living room, at attention. She's like a roommate, And, his drum kit is at his office at work, because it was just, at that point I was like, okay, we don't have any room anymore. But it's wonderful to be with another artist like that, because he really brings music into my life all the time. He's always practicing or writing songs, or, we're playing music. And so it's huge for me. I think what's a little different now, in Tropicalia, I was referring more to bands. And I do write about a little bit about Stevie Nicks and this new collection, but now it's more about the sounds of the music, guitars and notes and chords, and just kind of the soundscapes have entered the work. I don't know if it's a conscious decision, but I realize that I've been making choices about not including specific pop cultural elements in my work, because I want it to be more accessible across any time. But that doesn't mean if the poem asked for that, I wouldn't give it to her. But I think that it's evolved in that way. One thing I will say, though, is that writing songs was a lot easier than writing poems, because I had no ambition whatsoever attached to that. Yeah. So it was just purely for fun and creativity. And so that was a real liberating experience. Yeah. And I do try to remember that when I'm writing, too. Afterwards is when, sort of the puts on its like black top hat, and shows up and says, what are you going to do with it? Where are you going to publish it? All of that. But when I'm actually in the midst of making it, I'm really not thinking about anything. Yeah. I'm just kind of thinking about my own likes and what I'm trying to do and craft and all the things that we think about when we write. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely noticed in your newest collection there's more of a shift towards the natural world, which was, also in Tropicalia, but I think is more apparent in this collection. Could you kind of talk about what your major influences were, any like poets or just like experiences that you're kind of writing about in this new collection?
That's great. I'm so pleased that you noticed that, because it's such a big part of who I am. Ecologies and being outside among the trees and looking at the sky, and it's something that has been a part of my humanity since I was a little girl growing up in Miami. Sitting in the backyard. We grew up in a really small house and had a small backyard, but had a lot of fruit trees, like lime trees, banana trees, mango trees, a lot of birds, and go to the beach a lot. We had a little boat, and we would go out on the bay. So the outer world, that natural world was always such a formative experience for me. And certainly one that I carried into Tropicalia, and now I would say yes, even more so in Courage and the Clock. And I think it's because I moved to Santa Barbara in California, which is technically a city, but really a town. And, it's a lot slower, and there's a lot less people and a lot less traffic, and I walk around outside a lot more than I did in South Florida, which is very much a car culture in a lot of ways. Like if you want to get to nature, you have to drive to it.
Yeah.
But in Santa Barbara, if you want to get to nature, you can just walk.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, it's really been making its way into my work. One of the things I remember is the first time I wrote about the mountains. I started dreaming. They started appearing in my dreams, which had never happened before because I'd never lived by the mountains. So that was really exciting. And then, of course, once it enters your subconscious, then it starts going into your poems.
Yeah.
There is a funnel between the two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm sure the walkability makes that huge difference.
It really does.
Yeah.
It really does. And also I would say for my anxiety levels too, is just not being in the car, that crunch of, I-95 traffic, which it felt like, the highway of death.
Yeah.
But you had to take it to go everywhere in South Florida. And now I don't even get on the highway, like hardly ever.
Wow.
I joke around that all I do is just drive in a circle around this little town. I go to work, I go to the grocery store, I go home,
Yeah.
But,
awesome.
It really suits me at the point that I'm at in my life right now. Definitely.
That's awesome. Yeah. So kind of talking about other themes in your newest collection, it seems like time and the past plays a huge part. Referenced in the title from like clocks, but also in poems like Sparrow that mention just the relationship that you have to the past. So could you kind of talk about your book's relationship to time, or what it's, how it feels about the movement of time, just like the past, and looking at the past now in this new collection?
Cloud, I really appreciate your careful reading on that. I really do, because you're just writing the book on your own. I've hardly showed it to anyone. I mean, I started sending it out finally this year, but I haven't really shared it a lot or talked to anybody about. So the fact that you picked that up is so exciting to me, because I really was trying to write a lot about the passage of time, mortality, very much through the perspective of gender as I experience it. I think there was a lot of looking back at the past, which I didn't really write much about in my first book, because I think I was still too close to it, and it was still too painful for me. But, with age comes distance, and also kind of a sense of safety, for me at least. I know so many people don't have that as they age, but I am very fortunate, and at this point in my life I do have, a very nurturing relationship with my partner. I finally have more of a stable job, and all the things that come with that. So I'm able to now kind of look back and write about those things. Interestingly enough, I think I've said it to my husband a couple of times. I'm like, ugh, I'm done writing about the past. I don't want to think about it anymore. This next book is going to be all about gardens and trees, and that's it. But yeah, I think I really needed to write about those things with the clarity that's offered only by time. And so I was able to do that. But sometimes when I'm, before I send the book out, I always read through it, and there are still, even at this point, there are still certain poems where I get a little emotional reading them, because I think about that young woman or that girl, and I just want to go back there. I just want to reach back and say, don't worry, I'm coming. I'm coming to help you. And she didn't know that. And those poems didn't, like the world that those poems inhabit did not know that things would turn out as lucky as they did for me. Because it could have very much gone the other way too, and did for a while, and very much did for a while.
Yeah, I love how you articulated that. I think, that kind of gratitude towards survival, and, I think that's apparent in Sparrow in particular, just like how things could have turned out differently, but they didn't. And it feels like this new collection is very grateful. And just, with its eye towards the exterior, to the natural, it seems like there's a slowness to it. Just taking everything in, which, it was beautiful to read. And
Thank you.
And so tied to that, I kind of want to talk about the political poems, both in Tropicalia and in your new collection. There's Uterus Heaven, and then, in your past collection, there is references to protests. There's Letter to the Right, kind of speaking from this place of anger with the system. And in Uterus Heaven, it's, kind of following that same vein of, but also looking towards, like, hopeful futures and this kind of, literal uterus heaven of, like, all these people in conversation. And could you just talk about, like, how your relationship to writing about the political has shifted, if at all, or kind of how you approach that poem in particular in this new collection?
Yeah, it's funny because Letter to the Right in Tropicalia, that was the first time I had ever taken my rage towards the systems, as you called it, and put it into a poem. Like, it had never consciously occurred to me to do that. Maybe I was doing it, in other kinds of way, like the Billy Bragg poem. While I was covering that protest, I was a journalist for many years in South Florida. And so it was the first time, it was during, I think it was during the Obama administration, and they were trying to push through the Affordable Health Care Act, and the conservative right was, advertising, like making these advertisements about, like, people pushing grandmothers off the cliff and taking away their Medicare. I don't know what, but I was just, like, literally enraged, and I really didn't know what else to do. And so I just got up at, like, 3 a.m. thinking about it, and I just went to my desk and I just wrote it. That was it. It came out fully formed. But then when Courage and the Clock came around, I had learned that lesson. So I started, channeling more of that anger into my work. And so Uterus Heaven came from a workshop. I was awarded a fellowship from the Academy of American Poets for being a poet laureate, and one of the things that I did was create these community workshops where I would bring in poets that had read at the Mission Poetry Series, which I curated for 10 years, and teach these community workshops. And of course, I would take the workshop as well. And so this one was taught by Crystal A.C. Salas, who is a wonderful poet in Los Angeles, a big-hearted human. And she gave us these poems, and she gave us this prompt. And she, in turn, had been inspired by a poem that Sara Borjas had written, Pocha Heaven.
Yes.
And then so Crystal's poem in her collection, Grief Logic, is called Nieta Heaven. And so when we sat down to, when she sat down and told us, gave us the prompt, and I started writing, it was uterus heaven because of everything that's been going on, the total attack on our reproductive rights and, all of the violences that are being thrust upon us at home and abroad.
Yeah, I think, the prosaic form in that poem too really kind of hits home just the ideas that you bring up in that poem and the kind of repetition of the lines. I really enjoyed reading that one.
Thank you.
I'm also curious to kind of hear about your relationship to form, like the prosaic form in particular. You also have Ode to Stevie that uses like the little tilde in between like the line breaks.
Yes, I love that tilde.
Yeah. Could you kind of talk about that move towards working in that form?
Another insightful question, because I realized that there were so many lyric poems in the book that I needed more narrative poems. And when I started writing more narrative poems, I have some, but I felt like I needed more just to balance that exploration out, that exploration of time, gender, mortality, nature, love, the past. I want to ground people too. I don't want to be so up in the clouds all the time. So when I wrote Uterus Heaven, it was a draft. But then when I started like taking it out of my notebook and putting it into my laptop, I decided it needed to be a prose poem. And then I did the same thing with Ode to Stevie and Dear Sister, and I'm sure there's another one I forget, Brujitas. But the tilde, I utilized, I had been thinking about the tilde for a while. First of all, I love the way that word sounds. You're talking about music. It has such a real music to it, almost like a cross between, to me, a bell and a horn. So I love saying tilde, and also I love the movement, the shape of it. There's a real continuity and forward and backward motion to it. It's like sort of like water, sort of migrating between the past and the present. So I think that's why I put that in Stevie, Ode to Stevie, also to emulate. Sort of the twirling of Stevie Nicks, her performance, aesthetic. So all of those things. But it's funny because some of those things I think about and I can explain now in retrospect, but a lot of those things just happen intuitively for me. And that is primarily how I work, is on instinct. And I don't really think about why it's happening. And the more that time has gone by and the longer I've been writing, the more I trust that instinct. And I don't even question it sometimes. When I go back to revise, then I might be a little more scrupulous. But while I'm drafting, this is what, because there's so many choices in writing. And you can just freeze up, and I have frozen up, and that's actually what happened to me with this manuscript. Is I kept on trying to make it more and better, and even now I think, I should have put these extra poems in here as anchors, and But I remember my friend Alex Litton, Regalado, she's like, what's going on with your book, dude? And I'm like, oh, you know, I've been writing, I've been publishing. And she's like, I think it's done. You know, in the way like only an old friend can tell you, you know? Yes. And she said it, and the way she said it was so Miami, Gen X-y, like, come on, you know? And she said it, and I just heard the gong of truth. Bong! I was like, she is right. Yeah. You know, I have to stop with this already and being so, like, precious. I was just trying to make it perfect, you know? So I think my new frontier, you know, I've been acquiring the aesthetic of authenticity, trying to at least, and my new frontier is to sort of push back against perfectionism, you know, and just realize that I'm a flawed being and everything I make is going to be flawed and it doesn't have to be perfect. And once I started thinking that way, I was able to really finish that book and just start sending it out. And now I talk to Alex, she's like, well, what about if you add this poem or that poem? I'm like, no, I don't want to look at that book anymore. It's complete, it's done, and I'm working on something else.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's those friends are so important in you know, moments like that, and kind of speaking to community at large. That last piece that you have on poetry and community in the manuscript, you kind of talk about your journey and just like the communities you're in, and I'm kind of curious to hear like who are those like people in your life, or what were those like first experiences of being in a poetry community, and like how did they shift your own literary activism and community work?
It's funny, I was just talking about this. I feel like the friendships that I made in my MFA program, not all of them were intact. Not everybody I stayed in touch with, and then some people, you know, just didn't make it, you know, and passed away during the AIDS epidemic, or, you know, addiction, or just, you know, not everybody is lucky enough to make it. And but the people that did make it that I remained friends with are still my friends. And, you know, Alex and I text each other on WhatsApp all the time. And she's in, you know, El Salvador. And it's funny the way we text each other. There's like no preamble. It'll be like, which word do you like better? This one or this one? And there won't even be a context, you know? And then we'll just like talk to each other about our work in a very fragmented way, but also a way that we really understand what the other one needs from us, you know? And we room together at AWP whenever we go, which is really special, because I get to spend this like quality time with her. And she gets to be with me when I'm like surly and like I don't want to talk to anybody. And I'm like, come on, Alex, stop talking to people. Let's go. You know, afterwards, like, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be so cranky. She's awesome. And, you know, Rick is another person that I've been friends with. You know, I wrote his introduction for the event tonight. Yeah. And we've been friends for more than 25 years. I mean, it's been a lifetime, you know. So it's just kind of amazing to still be able to connect with them as friends, as family, you know, as humans, and also as poets, you know, and collaborate on all kinds of projects together, teachings and readings. Rick is judging the Alta California Prize. I saw that, So there's just, you know, that's amazing to me that I get to work with him. And because that's the most important thing to me when I try, at least when I'm working with someone, to work with somebody that I care about, or that I want to get to know, you know, because I like them. That is way more important to me than how prestigious that person is, you know, in terms of prizes and publications and all of that. And that's not because I'm such a I'm so earthy, and, you know, it's just because it makes my life easier. For sure. And it also deepens the caring that I have about a project that I'm working on. Yeah. If the people involved in are people that I love, you know? Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and kind of speaking to the Alta California Prize, You started that during your poet laureateship, right? In Santa Barbara.
Yeah.
What was like the decision that you had internally to kind of like, this was my project, I want to focus on publishing, I want there to be bilingual editions. Why was that, I guess, your project of choice?
I think it's something I have a lot of ideas. I just don't have the stamina to execute them all. But it's something that I had been thinking about for a long time, and I wanted to do something for the Latina community of poetry. And I also been watching Alex and all the work she's been doing as a translator, and how passionate she is about it, and how important it is, because it really just kind of opens up access between communities. And Crystal's book, for example, Grief Logic, her grandmother had not read her poems at all because her grandmother didn't speak Spanish. Now her grandmother was able to read all her poems. And her grandmother was a huge influence on her work. She was also a poet, so it was so rewarding to see that and be able to meet them and talk to them about that. So part of it is trying to, amplify the voices of Latina artists. And the other part is just selfishly me, wanting to put some good into the world and feel good about doing that,
Yeah.
And so I think it's a combination of those things. And I was really lucky too, because I went with that idea to Gunpowder Press, which is a local press, and they were just like, sure, we'll do it. So they could have said no. I mean, it's a lot of work, and I obviously no one is in poetry publishing for the money. But they did it, and they've been making these beautiful books, and we'll see. We've published 6 books, and this will be the 7th, and I don't know what's going to happen after that, but just take it as it comes, I guess. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What was it kind of like for you to get involved in the Santa Barbara poetry community, the literary scene? I'm just curious to hear what that experience was like for you.
Well, my husband, we have been talking about leaving South Florida, and I was applying. I didn't apply a lot, but I applied to a few teaching jobs, and it's duly ignored. And then he got a job in Santa Barbara, and we said, let's go. And so I was so caught up in all the logistics of moving our lives that I didn't even think about what it would be like to move to a state that I had never been to a city I had never, I knew no one. And so after I got there, and after the initial I'm on vacation feeling went away, I was like, I don't know anyone here. And so I started reaching out to people, and one of the people I reached out to is Melinda Palacio, who is currently the poet laureate of the first Chicana poet laureate of the city, and doing an amazing job. She's an amazing person, a real light. And I reached out to her because I had met her at AWP, and I was like, hey, I'm living in town, and she met me. And then she sort of kind of pointed the way to readings and events, some of which I went with her, and then I just started going regularly. It's a small community, and everyone goes to each other's readings all the time. And, but it's also been growing with different kinds of poets as well. Julian Talamantes Brolaski. They have some books out on Wave, and they're also a musician. And so they've moved back or into town. I can't remember if they lived there before or not, but they're bringing like a whole other element. I just went to the park that's right across the street from my house, and Julian brought in C.A. Conrad.
Wow.
And it was like 8 people. I have C.A.'s book in my purse right now somewhere. It was just like 8 people sitting around on the grass, and then
Wow.
C.A. reading their work in the dusk. You know, it was just like amazing. So, you know, there's like the long standing community, and then there's like, you know, these spin-offs and people bringing different kinds of poets in, and yeah, it's just been a real experience. And because the town is small enough, and I don't feel so ground down all the time from city living, I can go to a lot of this, you know, and yeah, it's. I feel like in South Florida, I became a writer when I became a journalist. And then the MFA, that was more like learning about community. And then as a journalist, I became as a writer. And then I became a poet long after my MFA. I started thinking of myself as a poet more. And then in Santa Barbara, it was the poet and an artist. So it's been interesting to see that evolution for me, and the way that I perceive myself.
Yeah. And like in contrast to Florida, would you say you've noticed similarities in the poetry community, or like, I guess, what are like the differences, what are the similarities in like both of these poetry communities that you've noticed?
Well, I mean, when I was in grad school, like we created our own communities, you know, our own publications and readings in black box theaters on Miami Beach, before it was South Beach. But that's where I lived actually during grad school. It was really cheap, and it was a cool place to live, you know. So, you know, we did that, but there wasn't really like, if it existed, it was really fragmented, and I wasn't aware of things that were going on outside of our little circle. But now, you know, there's Miami, you know, there's the book fair, there's, you know, the Miami International Book Fair. I mean, there's all these cultural organizations that are not only bringing, you know, poets in for other poets, but going out into the communities and the schools and the centers and like engaging with everyone through poems. I think that's one of Miami's mission statements is, you know, to have every person in Miami-Dade County encounter a poem, you know, and when I left 11 years ago, that was like 2.6 million people. So I'm sure it's more than that, and they do amazing work. We don't have anything of that scale in Santa Barbara, but we do have a lot of people that have relationships with poets and publishers all over the country, and so that's how we get people to come in. People coming in from LA, people coming in from Fresno, from DC, from El Salvador, you know, just different places. And it's really through friendship, you know. It's a lot more organic and not as structured, and that's really a beautiful thing. Sometimes, you know, you're kind of hustling around for some funding,
right?
So you know, it's got its challenges,
for sure.
But it's very much a people-driven experience. Yeah.
You referenced earlier the Mission Poetry Series. I was curious if you could just talk about the origins of that and what your experience has been being a curator.
Yeah, so that was founded by 2 people, Paul Farrakano, who lives in the Bay Area and is an activist and a poet, and Sister Susan Blomstad, who I believe was a nun in the order, whatever the name of that order is, that's connected to the mission there. And it was founded in a way that they wanted to create a place for self-expression that felt safe and healthy, and a way to connect with community members. So they, I'm trying to think of how many years this has been around now. 13 years, 15 years. I can't even tell you anymore. I think it was 2009. So they did it for like 4 or 5 years. And then in 2014, I had just moved there the year before. Paul came to me, and we were friends at that point. I had read the series right when I moved there. It's like, I'm moving back to the Bay Area. I want to give this series to you. And I was like, no. I don't know anything. I don't know how to do this. I don't know anything about this. I don't know anyone here, and you should probably give it to someone else. And he's very gently persuasive, and he just said, okay, but he just like kept on trying to do it, and finally I said, okay, I'll do it. So I did. And one of the things that I told myself was that I wasn't going to have any readings at all unless I could pay the poets. Because there was plenty of readings going on around town that were free for everyone, and also that poets were just donating their time and their work, but I wanted them to be compensated in some way. So for a while, Paul was fundraising, and then I started applying for little mini grants from poets and writers, and then eventually the last 3 or 4 years, I would apply for a city grant, which are small grants up to $6,000 that the city of Santa Barbara gives out to cultural entities, and I was able to, secure some of that.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I was able to pay poets and also make free broadsides, and in the early years we had like a buffet table and. All kinds of little accoutrements that, flowers and plants and all of that. We sold books. My husband is a bookseller for many, many years, so he sold, the books for us. Awesome. And it was a real family affair.
Yeah. That's so cool. I mean, so much of the literary kind of citizenship is like either no pay or very little pay, especially in poetry. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
That you prioritize that because
people need to get paid. We all need to have money in our pockets. That's why we work, and it's just. That's not to say that I haven't been involved in other readings that there was no compensation. Right. And that's fine too, but it can't all be like that,
right.
And so I decided, this is going to be something that is not like that, and this is going to be something that actually places additional values on the art that we're all making.
Right.
And so, it wasn't like a ton of money or anything like that, but it was usually anywhere between $300 to $500 in that range. So I tried.
Yeah, that's incredible. Same for publications. A lot of times, no pay. It's a lot of unpaid labor. So that $300 is major poetry money. Yeah. I was curious if you could talk a little bit about your experience being a Poet Laureate Fellow at the Academy of American Poets and what that kind of experience was like for you.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
That was like winning a lotto. And I almost didn't apply to that. Like, I was so burnt out from work, and the deadline just kept on, rushing towards me like a train, and I was just like, I can't do it. I'm just too tired. It was the day of the deadline. It's like, I'm just too tired. I can't do it. And as I was saying that, I was walking to my desk and I was sitting down and opening my laptop. I'm not doing it. And I just kind of ignored that voice and this other drive, Maybe it was ambition put on its top hat, And I'm like, I'm just going to do it anyway. And so I just sat there for 6 or 8 hours or something. And did it, and really, and I had asked some questions about it. I'd contacted them earlier. I had gotten all the information that I needed, and I knew what I wanted to do. It was all in my head, but it was just a matter of sitting down and really, meticulously stitching it all together. And And those applications are really cumbersome, I'm sure you know. They take time and a lot of reflection, but I did it, and then I just closed my laptop and I didn't think about it anymore. And then I got a message from Jen Benka, who was the president of the Academy at the time, and she's like, "Oh, I wanted to know, I think it was an email. I want to know if you have time to talk tomorrow," and da-da-da. I was like, "Sure, you can. I'm at work, but you can call me at this time." Mm-hmm. And I remember turning to my husband, Mark, and going, maybe she's just like emailing just to say like, "Oh, thank you for your application and you weren't selected," because I just couldn't believe it, you know. And he was like, "Maybe, but maybe not," you know.
Yeah.
So when I talked to her on the phone, she confirmed that, that I had been one of the laureates selected, and I was just thrilled, you know. I was thrilled for so many reasons, you know. I was thrilled that I could continue funding the Mission Poetry Series. I could create these poetry walks in collaboration with the library, which was the community classes that I could create when everybody would write a poem. I collaborated with the library, and they created these poster-sized poems, and then we bought these frames for them with that fellowship, and we would display them at all these different public events in town. So at the farmer's market or at the park, or, you know, it was just really like amazing. And then like the poets would come and photograph themselves with it. And it was just so exciting to see people's faces light up when they saw their poems published and on display, like artwork, you know. And then the Alta California Prize, you know, it was just incredible working with our inaugural winners, Nick Reiner and Crystal, who were the most wonderful partners to work with. They were just so brilliant and so filled with goodwill, and we brought them in for the Mission Poetry Series, and they brought all their families from like different parts of California. There were like 70 people there. It was the most we had ever had anybody attend that reading, but it was so exciting to see how excited all their family and friends were for them. And then for me personally as a poet, to have my biography and my poems at the Academy site, which is, you know, I've been a member, you know, not every year, but almost every year since I was in grad school. That was a dream, you know, come true. So it's really actually nice to talk about it a little bit, because I don't really think a lot about like the, you know, when something good happens to me in poetry land, it feels great, and then, you know, you're with that happy feeling for a little while, and then you just kind of like let it go and keep going down the road. So it's really nice to like reconnect with that sense of joy. I remember walking around the neighborhood, nobody knew yet, and I was taking like a walk at dusk, and I was almost like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening to me.
That's awesome.
Yeah, especially, you know, as somebody in middle age or late middle age at this point, and, you know, everything in my life has always happened to me later than everybody else. So I think this was just another instance of that. And I also think that's why I'm so grateful all the time, because, you know, I'm just older, and I've seen how badly things can go for people sometimes. So any little bit of encouragement just feels like a gift to me.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. I think so true with so many marginalized artists, and you know, overlap with mental illness or disability or addiction. There's just so many ways that I guess complicate our life, and so the celebrations are very important.
I have to remember that. I don't do enough of that.
I'm kind of curious what you'd like to see out of like the literary world or community at large. Like, what kind of direction do you think that we need to move into what should we do differently? What kind of like worlds do you envision for literary communities, either across the country or specific to Santa Barbara?
That's a good question. I think I have two different parts to that question. The first part is I would like to see more partnerships between communities. I feel that's something that Letras actually has done many years ago, partnering with Cave Canem and all the work that they do.
Yeah.
It's a long list, and I don't have it all at my fingertips, but I've been witness to a lot of it. But I would like to see a lot more of that and not see our communities so segregated. So that's something that I would welcome. I think for me personally, I'm becoming repulsed with the more poisonous sides of social media, and the attacks and the glomming on and, the letters. And it's just, it's just all feeling like a bunch of white noise that are distracting us from the work, that we do as artists and the work that we should be doing to sort of lift each other up. And I don't mean we should all just, sit around holding hands and chanting all the time. But I do feel that a lot of it just feels like Mean Girls to me, and I just don't care about any of that anymore. There's much larger tragedies unfolding locally, nationally, globally, and I think we should really keep our eyes on who the real enemies are, the military-industrial complex. Not just ours, but all over the world. But ours, we're the ones that are funding so much of it, and supplying so much of it. And I would just like to see, more activism and less pettiness. But, even as I say that, I know I've been petty, I know I have. It's just ridiculous to say I haven't. I mean, I think at this point I have the good sense to keep it to myself. But those are my aspirations.
Yeah, that's great. I love, two solid things.
Yeah.
What advice would you have for someone, especially in the Latina community, trying to get involved in like their own poetry community, or kind of just trying to create their own kind of community, or break into that space?
Yeah, I think that the number one thing would be just to go to other people's events, support other people. Not everyone is going to write poems that are your cup of tea, and maybe you don't have to go to those, but you can go to some other ones. Or you can go to those too and not necessarily be, I love your poems, but I love what you're doing. You're a maker. We need more makers. We need more of that energy in the world. And so I think there's a way to support everyone, even if they're not making work that you want to read even. That doesn't mean you can't support that person in that act. So I would say go to readings, go to events. Most of those readings are free. And start talking to people and telling them why you're there,
Yeah, that's so important, especially I think now we live in a age that feels so isolated, I think, at times because of what you were mentioning, just, internet, social media. I think the pandemic kind of accelerated that, and so making those connections and just showing up, feels very important.
And then, I also feel like differently abled folks maybe aren't able to do that, but then they do have some options in terms of Zoom, right? And so, just try to find a way that works for you, where you can connect with other poets and other people that are working in those communities, but always so it works for you, because everything doesn't work for everyone, you know.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to take care of yourself. That's the other thing I would say, is just really take care of yourself, you know, protect yourself, sleep, rest.
Mm-hmm.
Don't feel like you always have to be doing and accomplishing. And yeah, those two things.
Yeah.
Community and community with yourself. You know, solitude is a beautiful thing. I love it. I love being alive. Before I got on the plane, the night before, I told my husband, you know, the thing that I'm looking forward to the most tomorrow is that for like 8 or 10 hours, I'm going to be traveling, and I don't have to talk to anyone. I can just read my book, and I can watch Rings of Power on my laptop, and, you know, like, it'll be really nice. But I think cultivating solitude is huge for making art. I think it's really important to have stillness, and I don't think it's possible to make it without it. But again, not everybody has that luxury, you know, and it is a luxury.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Emma. This was great talking to you about everything and community work and your books, and I'm just very happy I had the opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you so much for all of your questions, Cloud. They're so thoughtful, and it's been a real pleasure. This really felt like a real conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.